now listening to the Film Monsters podcast with Nate and Ray.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to a Film Monsters podcast episode after a brief break. I am Nate.
And I am Ray.
And yeah, Ray and I took a week off, but I think it was a good week to take off because our last episode, I don't know about you, Ray, but I'm still kind of riding off the high of talking to John. I think that was such an amazing experience and one that I'm excited to live again by talking to other filmmakers and inviting other people on the podcast. I think you and I always had an idea to make this a very collective thought thing and an engagement type of thing, and being able to have that conversation with John was a really amazing experience.
Yeah, I had a great time. It was funny because, unbeknownst to our listeners, we listen to our own podcast because
yes,
because why not? And it was really cool, hearing back. I took some notes of stuff that I wanted to kind of work on, but at the same time, it's for the most part, I loved every minute of it. Hearing John talk about it and how passionate he is about the project that he's working on, and I don't know. It was a good time, and despite me being a little overtly critical of how not John, John was fantastic, but just myself, I think it went really well considering that was our first interview.
Yeah, it was cool. I got a lot of messages from people that were like, that was really thoughtful and really well put together. And I mean, whenever you hear those types of things, when you put a lot of time and stuff into something, it's really awesome. And obviously, Ray and I had some questions prepared, but we tried to make it flow as casually as possible. And what I thought was really cool was despite having a set thing of conversations that we'd set up beforehand, I feel like it was just really a natural conversation. And John, despite being a director, is obviously someone who really loves film, and I think that made it all the more easy to be a part of, because he talks the way that we talk about it, which made it something really special. I feel
like we've said in the past, he's one of us, as in he's another movie lover who just wanted to create his own platform and not wait for the Hollywood machine to hand it to him, but for him to just get in there and do it and do his own thing. And I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and I had a really great time. And I definitely look forward to doing more episodes like that in the future.
Oh, for sure. And the one other thing I wanted to bring up about it too, and I think it's pertinent when it comes to today's episode and what we're planning on discussing today, is I was really happy that you and John were able to kind of have that conversation about cultural representation in film, especially for, the Hispanic community, because I feel like what John brought up that I thought was really amazing is for him being Colombian, talking about, yes, there may be representation for Hispanic filmmakers out there, you think someone like Guillermo del Toro, but you're really only getting one segment of the population, and him talking about wanting more representation from Colombian filmmakers. And I think that opens up a larger conversation for just culture in general, and people just yearning for representation for their own culture and backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that we were able to tackle that, but I'm also really stoked that maybe this is going to open the door for us to tackle hopefully other not just other racial communities, but also other you have the LGBT and their involvement in the film industry, and then we have seen a rise on the deaf community, so it's cool to see that this this thing that we love called film is spreading to more than just your typical Hollywood blockbuster.
Exactly. I 100% agree. And I think that the beautiful thing about film is that you are able to learn things about parts of the world and people's backgrounds and things that you would never be able to learn if that medium didn't really exist. I mean, you can read a history book and you can do those types of things, but I feel like when someone makes a piece of art that is directly correlated to their heritage or their background, and whether that be a true drama or a horror film or a comedy or any sort of representation of that part of life, I think that's such a cool thing, and you can just really learn a lot from that.
And going along a little bit with like the topic, what we're going to talk about today, um, this is something that ended up being really eye-opening for me specifically. I know I suggested this topic, but and we could just get into it. We're in February and we are celebrating Black History Month, which we figured since it is a film-based episode, this was a perfect time to talk about some awesome African American filmmakers and the impact that they have had on the film industry. Having said that, though, it was really eye opening and almost like shameful to me to be able to sit there and read these and be like, I don't know as many as I thought. And that's not good.
No, and it's funny that you said that too, because one of the greatest classes that I've ever taken in my life was in film school. I actually took an African American film studies course when I was in college, and it was really eye-opening to me to look at how the industry has treated Black people throughout the years, and just because I mean we always talk about, in our culture what women have had to go through even to get to where they are, but like thinking about how difficult it was for Black people to even have a voice in the film industry from so early on. I mean, like you look at this whole concept of Black actors really early on when people started casting them in film, they would really only try to cast the people with the lightest skin possible because they wanted it to be something that they felt that general white audiences could relate to. And so there was a lot of really talented dark skin actors and actresses that weren't able to be in movies because they weren't treated as people. And I mean, you look at the film that is the film that everyone talks about, that was the pinnacle of so many filmmaking techniques, is the film Birth of a Nation, which is essentially a KKK propaganda film. And I mean, that's where that's where most of the filmmaking techniques and ideas that exist in cinema were created. And it's really disgusting to think that that's where it all got it started, from people in blackface and mocking Black actors, and not just Black actors but Black people. And it's crazy to think of what Black people have had to go through over the years just to get representation in film. And I think what you said is important, Ray, where it's like this, I mean, obviously neither one of us are Black, but what we want to do from this conversation is open up the discussion of, let's talk about Black filmmakers that are really making an impact on the industry, and also recognize that we want more Black voices in the industry as well.
It's interesting to me that you brought up Birth of a Nation because I wanted to start off talking about a little known someone that I just learned about just over these past few days preparing for this episode. Are you familiar with Oscar Micheaux?
Yes, I am.
So I was doing some reading about Oscar Micheaux, and for people listening that aren't familiar, it's okay. I didn't know about him until a week ago. Um, and correct me if I'm wrong, but he is considered the very first Black filmmaker. Um,
Yes, I
and
actually, Within Our Gates was one of the first movies I watched in film school.
and Within Our Gates was the film that I wanted to bring up because
Mm-hmm.
Within Our Gates, from some of the research I was doing, was a reactionary film about Birth of a Nation, because Birth of a Nation wanted to paint such a awful depiction of African Americans in this country, and Within Our Gates was his kind of a reactionary thing to really show people what Jim Crow era was doing to all of these African Americans in our country. And Within Our Gates was a reactionary film, almost like a protest film against Birth of a Nation, which I didn't know about this film until about a week ago. So now I feel like I need to start doing some catch up because I didn't know about this film, and now I'm really excited to watch it.
It is it is a brutal movie to watch too. From the fact, like, when I watched that movie in film school, I was like, this movie came out in 1920. Like, it was mind blowing to think that something like that was able to be made, because it really is. You can tell that it's directly correlated to kind of fighting back at Birth of a Nation, but at the same time, when you watch it, there's so many different ideas that are conveyed. And I mean, the lead of the film is a woman. And I mean, even you think like in the 1920s, imagine casting a black woman as the lead of your film. And it's really impactful, and I would recommend anybody out there. It's public domain, so you can watch this movie for free virtually anywhere. But it is really it's a really important film when it comes to filmmaking as a whole, but also for Black cinema. And it's a really unique movie, and I'm really glad that I watched it.
It was interesting because I was doing as I was reading more about Oscar Michel and how the big Hollywood machine would turn him down almost all the time, and this was obviously detrimental because he was trying to get his voice out there, but also I was reading that it was almost a little advantageous because he was able to, since he was the sole producer, he was able to release his films without any censorship guidelines. So he got pretty raw and gritty, from what I understand.
Yes, the movie really takes a lot of risk, and this is like the pre-Hays Code era, which I don't know. Are you familiar with the Hays Code,
Mm,
Ray?
I can't say I am.
Yeah, so the Hays Code started in 1934, and essentially what it was a way to enact intense censorship in films. And so like there were guidelines to how much profanity you can have and nudity and even like using the restroom in films. And so from 1934 to 1968 that existed. So pre Hays Code, there are a lot of really interesting movies that you can find that kind of push the boundaries as to what you think you could do in a movie. And I'm really glad you brought that up because it was not on my list originally. And even going to film school and knowing about that movie, you jogged my memory, and it really made me think of like, wow, that it just really is one of the most important films in history, especially early film history as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring, I don't know a whole lot. There's obviously, and something I want to just kind of stress on this episode for those listening, we are going to talk about a myriad of films that we enjoy, filmmakers that have done some phenomenal things. But ultimately, the point of what we're trying to make is let people know these are voices that you need to be listening to. So we're going to try to share the appreciation that we have, but if you can have any takeaway from this episode, go seek out these films, go seek out the voices of all of these uh, black filmmakers that are doing some really important things, and they have a lot to say, and it's important to seek them out.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more because I feel like there's so many movies that we're gonna miss over too because there's just so many to talk about. It's like damn near impossible to be able to hit all of those. If you're cool with me transitioning into it, Ray, I want to jump forward a few years. But there's another movie I really wanted to talk about that I think is really important when it comes to black cinema as a whole. And this is a really prolific African American director who I feel like has made some really amazing films, but I really wanted to highlight his 1978 movie that I think a lot of people talk about when it comes to important films in black film history, and that's Killer of Sheep from director Charles Burnett.
Can't really say I've seen this one.
Yeah, so this is one we talked about it a lot in film school, and some of the other movies that people know him for are like To Sleep with Anger, My Brother's Wedding, The Glass Shield. He's made a lot of really incredible films. But what is so important about Killer of Sheep is that it's less of like this big bloated Hollywood film, and it's very much a slice of life movie about what black life was like in this time period. It actually follows a man who works in a slaughterhouse, and he is just dissatisfied with life. And he has a wife who really loves him, and he has kids, but he's just not content with the way that the world is going. He doesn't want to live a life that he feels like he has to live, and there's this yearning for something more. And I think that like in 1978, you think we're talking like peak struggle for, still struggling with civil rights, still struggling with all these really intense issues. And this is a movie looking at someone who has kind of been boxed into a specific lifestyle. They live in a house that they don't want to live in. They want something more out of life, and really just saying, is there more, and can there be more because of the color of my skin? And it's another movie that, like, it's very slow paced, it's very thoughtful, but it is a movie that I really recommend people watch because it is it's a pinnacle film in Black film history that I think really stands the test of time. And it's beautiful, and it's heartbreaking, and yeah, I just wanted to mention it really quick because I think that it is a really important film in Black film history.
And repeat the name one more time.
It's called Killer of Sheep.
Killer of Sheep.
Yep, and it came out in 1978.
Well, while we're talking about very important films from that era, this one's slightly newer. It doesn't date back to that far away. This one came out in '89, and this one is one that's considered like one of the most important films from that era and from that cultural affiliation, and that's Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting about Spike Lee. When I took my African American film studies class, my professor was actually very critical of Spike Lee, because despite Do the Right Thing and the cultural impact that Spike Lee has made on filmmaking for the African American community, he does not do a very good job writing female characters.
Yeah.
his movies virtually view women as like just like a backdoor to anything else in his movies. Even like when you look at a film like She's Gotta Have It, it's not, you think that movie is very empowering about, women's sexuality and like the idea that, oh, I'm going to put a Black woman at the forefront. But there's a really incredible, and I'm sure a lot of you out there know who I'm talking about, but a really incredible author who passed away a few years ago, Bell Hooks, who is one of my favorite authors. She's written so many incredible work. She was a predominant African American feminist who really kind of pushed the boundaries of, what people were willing to question. And she wrote a lot about Spike Lee. So I have a complicated relationship with that movie. And I think it's because of the fact that my professor was so critical of it and made us think a lot more about that movie than, on the surface level, there's great performances. It has really good cinematography, and it does look at like this idea of racism. And at the end of the day, no one in that movie does the right thing.
No one.
They don't. And I don't want to take away from the cultural significance of it, but I think that it also is important to look at, even when we're making movies that are important in that regard, that there's always more that we can do. And writing good female characters is a very important thing. But I don't want to take away from the fact that that is probably one of the most culturally significant movies out there.
But can I make a controversial opinion?
Yeah.
I like BlacKkKlansman better.
Also do I. I'm not a big Spike Lee fan, and BlacKkKlansman is my favorite of his work.
Same. BlacKkKlansman was incredible. And I was going to bring up both of them back to back. So here's a good moment to kind of transition over to BlacKkKlansman because Do the Right Thing was good. I really enjoyed that movie, but I feel like BlacKkKlansman really pinpointed that, having to do all of these really awful things and having to traverse all these terrible things that were happening. And the thing that blows my mind about BlacKkKlansman is that this didn't happen 100 years ago.
No. It's very, and that's what I feel like a lot of people, when they start talking about, the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and, race riots and all those things, like, this was not that long ago. I mean, you're talking the early 70s. Like, it's horrifying to think that, like, between the 60s and 70s, that's not that far off. And honestly, with some of the politicians that we have in office, it scares me that, some people would try to do something extreme again. I think about that a lot. But this movie really does tackle some heavy subject matter. But what impressed me about this movie so much is that despite tackling heavy subject matter, it was able to make it comedic.
It was funny. It was so funny.
And John David Washington is proving to be as talented as his dad.
Yeah, I love Black Klansman. I think this movie was, and I also take a little bit of pride on this movie because the actual cop in Black Klansman, he retired here to Utah, so he resides here in Utah. I don't know where, but he resides out here in Utah.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, from last time I checked. I mean, he could have already moved for all I know. I'm
Wow,
not
that
a
is
stalker, I
crazy.
promise.
That is crazy. But yeah, that's a movie. I actually saw that opening weekend in the theater, and I just thought that it was fantastic. I really
No,
enjoyed it.
no, I have a question. Did you have any walkouts on that movie? Because I did.
No, none.
We had some people walk out, especially when they show that footage at the end of all the protests.
Yeah, I'm sure I know exactly the type of people that would walk out on that movie.
Yeah.
The kind of people that need to be seeing that movie are the ones who are walking out of that movie.
So, Do the Right Thing and Black Klansman. I wanted to do those back to back. Those are two movies that I enjoy tremendously.
Absolutely. Well, I have one more kind of pinnacle history film before I get into talking about a lot more modern movies, because most of my list are more modern films. But I want to talk about just really quickly another film I was introduced to at film school. And this movie came out, I want to say it was in the 1990s. Yeah, 1996. And this was a movie, the very really early movie, directed by a black lesbian woman. And it's called The Watermelon Woman. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it before.
The name sounds familiar, but I definitely haven't seen it.
Yeah, so essentially what it's about a 25-year-old African American woman in Philadelphia that works at a video rental store, which was really cool. And at the same time, she's trying to make a documentary about figuring out about this woman called the Watermelon Woman, who was a black actress that played. I'm sure if you've heard about black cinema or the way black actors were casted in early films, do you know about the stereotype called the mammy?
Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially, like, black women were casted in these roles called mammy roles, where they were essentially like the head of the household who takes care of the children, but they were still very heavy stereotypical as the way they talked and the way they acted. And so the entire film is her trying to uncover information about this actress. And so it's a really interesting thing because it's a movie that looks at obviously the history of how black people were treated in film and like black actresses acted in those movies, but also it's looking at a black woman in present society, well, the society in the 90s, that's working at a video store but is also an open lesbian, which, I mean, if you think about it, being a gay person in the 90s was not easy.
No.
And also, not only being a gay person in the 90s, but being a black gay woman in the 90s would have been very difficult. And so this movie touches on a lot of really important subject matter, and it goes some directions that I did not expect. But it's a really important movie that I thought I would mention because I think that, there's a lot of, like I said, Ray and I could be here for an eternity trying to cover every really important film that's ever been made, and it would be damn near impossible. But that's one, like what Ray was saying earlier, we're hoping on the podcast to utilize the platform to kind of bring light to a lot of things that don't get light brought to. And so I think talking about a movie that's not only, directed by a black woman, but is directed by a black lesbian woman is very important. And I hope some people will check it out because it's really great.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look it up because I don't know about that one either.
So most of my movies from this point on are more modern films, but those are the three kind of historical pieces that I really thought were important to bring up. And I'm really glad, and I would recommend to anyone out there, like if you're in film school or you're interested in film, take an African American film studies class because you will learn some really interesting and also horrifying information about the industry. And I picked up on watching a lot of really great movies from that class.
I wanted to bring up one more like historical movie. This is not directed by a black director, but I feel like it was so pivotal and important for that demographic. And you know it's coming. You know I was going to talk about it, and you know I was going to bring up the Night of the Living Dead.
Yes, absolutely. You have to bring up Night of the Living Dead. I think that we've talked about this movie a million times on the podcast, but how significant is it in the horror genre to have a black lead at that time period in history?
Yeah, not only having a black lead, but also, and I've mentioned this before. I've mentioned this example before multiple times, but I'll bring it again just to keep nailing the point. For George Romero to have put a room full of white men to root for the black man, and then have the rug pulled from under them at the very last second of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's just heartbreaking. It's one of the most heartbreaking endings because he made a country that was that's predominantly white in the 60s/70s to rally behind the sole survivor black man. And then right when you think he's out of the clear, spoilers for those who haven't seen a movie from the 60s, he just pulls the rug from under you.
Yes.
And
It's
and
insane.
that was heartbreaking. And the fact that everyone collectively felt that. And it's one of the most upsetting endings in the film. And if you think about it, back then it wasn't uncommon for people to just, hell, it's not uncommon now for people to have these thoughts. Imagine back in the 70s, but for them to, that is like a magical moment of movie history where I wish I could have been sitting there and seeing the reaction of all of these people that probably had some prejudice against African Americans, and for them to just feel that gut punch at the very end of that film.
And think about the importance too of not only that, but like George Romero proving at that period in time where so many black people were cast in films in these very stereotypical roles, that you cast a strong, intelligent, powerful black male character as your lead, and how important that is for people to see. That's what I love so much about that movie, is at that time period having a character like that, that I can only imagine a lot of people came out of that film idolizing in a good way, because he is the badass of the movie.
Oh yeah, the whole time you're rooting for him.
100%. We've praised Night of the Living Dead a million times on this podcast. It is, if I was making an essential list of 100 movies you have to watch before you die, Night of the Living Dead is 1,000% on there.
And while we're on the topic of Night of the Living Dead, just really quick, I just wanted to give a shout out to a phenomenal actor that was involved on the remake of Night of the Living Dead, which was Tony Todd.
And actually, that's funny you mentioned that, because I can actually transition now, because talking about Tony Todd, I know we both love horror movies on this podcast. I really wanted to shed some light on Candyman, but not only the original Candyman, but I'd also like to talk about Nia DaCosta's remake or spiritual sequel to Candyman as well.
Oh yeah, do it up. I actually haven't seen the remake, oddly enough.
Yeah, so the original Tony Todd Candyman, what I think is really interesting about that film, and Ray, have you seen the documentary series on Shudder that's about the history of black people in horror films?
Film noir?
Yes.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, so it's amazing. And what I think is interesting is when you talk about Candyman, is it's so incredible to have a horror icon that is played by a black man. But as you know from that documentary, there are problematic elements to the Candyman character. I mean, like when you look at it, like he's coming back and he's murdering women, and he's doing all of these things where like they're saying, okay, you're making this character, but he's still playing into a lot of the negative stereotypes. And regardless, I think it's an amazing movie. I think that the character of Candyman is so unique. I think that the tragic story that's really not played on in the first film, you really don't get a lot into the tragedy of his character. Are you familiar with why Candyman is the way that he is?
Wasn't it because it's ultimately like a gothic love story, right?
Yeah, so he was a painter who fell in love with a white woman. And when he got the woman pregnant, the town found out about it, and they ended up cutting off his hand that he paints with. Or he's either a painter or a piano player. I want to say he's a painter. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've seen it. But they cut off his hand, and that's why he has the hook on his hand before they kill him. And so he is essentially like signifying Black trauma. The character is representative of that. And what I wanted to kind of go into is Nia DaCosta's Candyman is actually, a lot of people call it a remake, but it is a direct sequel to the first movie. I don't
Oh,
know if you knew
interesting.
that. Yeah,
No,
so
I
it's
didn't.
Tony Todd actually makes a cameo in it, which was really cool. But essentially, what they're saying is that Candyman is not one specific person. Candyman is a collective ideal of Black men, possibly women, but the movie looks more at Black men and the trauma that they have experienced due to hate crimes and what have you. And that summoning them, that essentially they're bringing justice to people, and obviously it's like whoever calls on them ends up getting the just desserts in that way. But I think that the Nia DaCosta version does a lot better job at exploring the trauma element of it, and also looking at the the lower income communities in the area that the film takes place in. You get a lot of conversation about gentrification, because Cabrini Green, which is where it takes place, is essentially a projects area that started to get wiped out so that they could build wealthier housing. And so people were being pushed out of their households so that they could build higher income housing for people. And so that plays a big part into the movie as well. So you have this really large conversation about race as a whole. And I was so glad Nia DaCosta was able to accomplish so much with that film. And I would recommend to you, Ray, if you've seen the original, watch it because it's fantastic. I think you'd really love it.
Yeah, I actually, oddly enough, I actually have the score on vinyl.
The score's great.
I picked up the score because I found it on sale for like $10, and I was like, "There's no way I'm not gonna love this movie."
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'm gonna pick up the score.
Yeah, the movie is fantastic and it's genuinely horrifying. There are some moments in that movie that really scared the shit out of me. I am a big fan of Nia DaCosta's Candyman, but that was a perfect segue that you brought up Tony Todd, Ray, because I wanted to mention both of those Candyman films because we are such big horror lovers on this podcast that you can't not talk about Tony Todd's amazing performance. And I will say that in the Nia DaCosta Candyman, I'm going to probably butcher his name, and I'm really sorry, but Yahya Abdul Mateen, that is the lead in the new Candyman, is phenomenal.
It's interesting what the Black community has done for horror. I feel like for a long time there was, and we'll get to this eventually, but I feel like since we're already in the topic of horror, for a long time there was this like, I don't want to say stigma because that makes it sound like it's a bad thing, and I don't think this is a bad thing. I just think we were all misguided by Hollywood into thinking that all that the Black community was churning out was like these raunchy comedies, which, I mean, I love a lot of those, but they were doing so much for other genres, like in the horror genre, for example. And while we're at it, let's just get on that and talk about Jordan Peele for a second.
It would be impossible to do an episode about Black History Month without talking about the importance of Jordan Peele, because we can sit here and talk about Jordan Peele's three movies all day long, but I really want to say one of the things I love so much about Jordan Peele is watch a trailer to a horror movie directed by a Black director and try not to see his name on the producer credit.
Oh yeah, no, he is so deeply involved, not just as a director, but just making sure that these stories, Candyman, the remake, he was a producer in it,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Jordan Peele, not only is he a great director and actor and writer, but he just wants these stories to be told, and he's willing to put his money where his mouth is, basically.
He's just a great person, and that's what I love about Jordan Peele is you can tell he genuinely cares. And what I love about Jordan Peele too is the amount of love he has for the horror genre and the amount of nods that he's had towards different horror films. Like if you watch Nope and you didn't catch that Shining reference, like every single one of his movies, he plays really heavily into paying homage to other films. And what I do love about his movies, and Nope may be lesser than the rest. There's a little bit there, But I do love that he's able to tackle some of these race issues in his films with delicacy. It's done in a way that doesn't feel ham-fisted. It's very natural. It's very much about a lived experience. And I feel like the cool part about when Get Out was released, I'm hopeful that there were a lot of horrible racist people in this country that went and watched that movie. And I hope that it was a wake-up call for a lot of people.
Yeah, seriously. Well, I just love with Get Out and Us. Some of the things, like how he uses comedy in a way that's so, like, it's a stroke of genius the way how he's able to blend the comedy and still do social commentary. I mean, even if you watch Key and Peele, the comedy sketch show that he has or that he had, he was still trying to include these, obviously Michael Keegan Key as well. I'm not just giving him credit to just one person, but like the writing that they both did on that show and some of the skits that they did
horrifying.
Were horrifying, but they were
Yeah.
so poignant, and you're laughing, but also like, should I be laughing at this?
One of my favorite Key and Peele sketches ever is when Keegan Michael Key plays the police officer that he arrested Jordan Peele, and he's the rapper, and he's playing his tracks that he had recorded on that it's the confession to everything that he did. The way that it's shot, like the cinematography in that, it's so dark and brooding, and there's moments of it that are genuinely horrifying, but you're also laughing at the same time.
Yeah, I love the one of my favorite skits that they did was the Othello one.
Oh, dude, yes, that one's hilarious.
When they're like so excited for Othello because they finally have like a strong black lead, and then they find out that he died.
Both of them are just geniuses, but I do love Jordan Peele, and I think that he is really going to be a big part of having black voices in the horror genre, especially. And I'm sure that he'll be able to segue out and let people do more things. I mean, I feel like at this point, Monkey Paw is probably going to get as big, if not bigger, than Blumhouse, which I would love to see.
And there was something that he said once. I don't know if he'll stick to it. I would not blame him at all if he doesn't stick to it. But I do appreciate the fact that he said that he wants to basically focus on original stories. He doesn't want to be adapting superhero movies or books or anything. He wants to keep writing original stories, which that's going to be a hard thing to pull, 20, 30 years into the genre filmmaking. But yeah. I applaud him for at least wanting that, because he certainly wants to keep bringing like these voices out for them to be heard.
Exactly. And I'll be really he's one of those. I know Ray and I bring up a lot of directors on this podcast, but he is one that I know Ray and I will be in the theater within the opening weekend to see whatever he puts out, because he is one of the most important voices in all of film right now.
For sure.
So yeah, I'm glad you brought up Jordan Peele. I think that he is an incredible filmmaker, and he's one that I'm really glad that you brought up. But I feel like while we're on the topic of really important filmmakers, right now, I want to bring up another filmmaker who is in a different genre, but I think is just as important, and that his voice is just as meaningful. And I couldn't go this episode without bringing up Mr. Barry Jenkins.
I knew Barry Jenkins was coming.
I love Barry Jenkins. I honestly, like, when you talk about films that show the Black experience in a way that is so palpable and authentic and real, and that even if you have not lived that life, you can just empathize for those characters so deeply, and there's such a realness to it. And I know, Ray, you said you've seen Moonlight, right? But you haven't seen Beale Street?
Yeah, I've seen Moonlight for sure.
So Moonlight, obviously, Barry Jenkins, from what I know, is a straight man. He's married.
Really?
Yes, he's married to a woman. He's actually married to the woman who directed The Farewell.
I had no idea. I thought he was part of the LGBT.
Yeah, so I don't know how he identifies, so I don't want to make any assumptions, but I know that he is married to a woman. But I feel like knowing that element, writing a story like Moonlight that really kind of exemplifies the experience for a black man in an area where it's hyper masculinized. I think that's right. I don't know. But where masculinity plays such a huge role, and imagine being embedded in a community like that and being a gay man. Like when every time I think about Moonlight, it just destroys me because I watch our lead character through the different parts in his life, and it's so heart-wrenching to think about not only dealing with the experience of being a gay person but also dealing with being a black person as well. Like being bucketed into two marginalized groups of people has to be such a difficult experience, and I think Barry Jenkins captures it in a very tender and beautiful and also heartbreaking way.
Yeah, Moonlight, there was when I watched Moonlight, it was first of all, just real quick shout out to Mahershala Ali because he was astounding on that film.
Incredible performance.
Rightfully so, won an Oscar for it. But I love the story that he tells, and because obviously, as we've made very clear, we neither of us are black, but in Hispanic culture, we're starting to make strides towards being more accepting of LGBT, but there's still apprehensiveness, more so than with Caucasians. I can't really speak for other minority groups, but within Hispanics, like there's still this apprehension to it. So I have seen people, call each other really horrible things because they're gay. The just all so seeing all of that firsthand towards some of my LGBT brothers and sisters out there within the Hispanic community, I know that the African American community also, like the whole masculinity thing is still very predominant, especially in lower income households. So that movie was just so impactful because I don't think people had really thought about what it means to be a gay black man in lower income living.
100%. And it's difficult because a lot of times you see in those type of communities that masculinity plays a very big role. And I think, like, especially in that middle segment of the film, you can just see how much he had to stand up for himself, especially when kids got really violent about things. And it would be hard because they're like not even just saying in gay relationships, but even having like a more tender romantic heart, it would be really hard to survive in one of those communities and deal with something like that. And it's so beautifully captured. And I know you haven't seen it, Ray, but I would say If Beale Street Could Talk is probably in my top 5 romance films ever made. It is so beautiful. It takes place, I can't remember the exact year. It's got to be like 60s, 70s, somewhere in that range. But essentially, the film is about this young man who is with this woman, and he ends up getting arrested for a crime that he didn't commit. And so it's kind of like flashback sequences to their relationships and showing where they get to when this horrible thing happens, and then showing how they kind of have to deal with that and live with it, because essentially he went to jail because he was racially profiled. And so the movie captures all those elements. But what I want to say is, aside from all that, because I feel like a lot of times when you talk about great films starring black people, and I know that this is a conversation brought up by a lot of black filmmakers, that a lot of films that are about the black experience are often rooted in trauma, and it's difficult not to make movies about that are about the black experience that aren't rooted in trauma because of how much they've had to go through. But one of the things I really want to bring up about this film that I think is really important is the depiction of the relationship between these two characters. I've seen a large conversation recently about sex in cinema recently, where people talk about, like, is sex needed in films and blah, blah, blah. And I am a big proponent of yes, because sex is a part of life. It is a part of the human experience. So taking that out of a film is essentially ignoring an element of the human experience. And If Beale Street Can Talk has one of the most beautifully shot, normalized sex scenes when it comes to real romantic love between two people. And the way Barry Jenkins shoots it, the score played over top of it, every single element of it feels so real, and it doesn't feel Hollywood glamorized. It doesn't feel like in a stupid comedy or something. Like, it's just so beautiful. And I wanted to highlight that because I know that it's got to be hard for a lot of Black people out there to watch films that are so rooted in trauma, because it's like everything is, every other movie that you see released is about like racism and overcoming racism. And I'm sure that seeing tender, real moments like that in film is just so important for people.
I've heard that. I actually heard from Roy Wood Jr. from The Daily Show.
Yeah.
This is kind of obviously The Daily Show is a comedy show. He said, I can't wait till we reach a point where Black people can make movies without having to rely on the stereotype, not on the stereotype, on the themes of our race. He was like,
Exactly.
basically making the point is like, I can't wait till the Black community can just make movies and not have to worry about, oh, we have to make some movie about, slavery or racial profiling. It's like, because it's just normalized now that we can all just tell our stories without having to have an agenda.
Exactly. And it has to be hard because if you're a Black filmmaker, you obviously want to bring light to those issues, because there are a lot of people out there that if they see things like that on the news, they just turn their TV off.
Yeah.
So doing it in media is so important. But I do agree. I think, be like, I want to see more Black films that are just like a horror movie made by a Black filmmaker. That's just like a slasher or something, like, so that they can make those movies and just be like, hey, people in my community can watch this, and it's just a movie. Like, white people have had that luxury for so long, and not even just for the Black community, but for every community that exists. I'd like to see more of that.
For sure. And I think we're off to a great start with people like Barry Jenkins and Jordan Peele.
Yes, Barry Jenkins and he's just a lovely human being, really is. Someone I really respect a lot, and someone that I will continue to support throughout his entire career. I still need to watch his Underground Railroad TV show. And I always push for great, unique, original content, but apparently his next film is the Lion King live action prequel.
Oh boy.
Which, more power to you, Barry. If that gets your name out there more, do your thing.
And who knows? It might be legitimately great.
Yeah, who knows? We'll see. We'll see. But yeah, I just wanted to bring up Barry Jenkins.
Well, I know that we have mentioned in the past that we're not the biggest like Marvel heads.
Yeah.
But I do think it is important to bring up Ryan Coogler and what he did by making Black Panther the success that it has been.
Exactly. It is. And as funny as this might be, I have never seen this movie.
I've seen the first one. I haven't seen Wakanda Forever.
But what I will say is I do think my favorite thing in the entire world when that movie came out was going on YouTube and TikTok and seeing these kids in predominantly Black schools where they're like, we're going to take you guys to go see this movie. And the expression that kids had on their face, that they're like, I get to go see a movie with a superhero with somebody that looks like me. Because you think,
yes,
pre Black Panther, you're looking at like Shaft. Like,
yeah.
I mean, seriously. And that's like the blaxploitation era of filmmaking. There really is not a Blade, I guess, if you want to look at Blade, but as far as like an accessible film that kids of all ages can see, you haven't had a lot of that over the years. And Black Panther, actually, it's funny, I've never seen that movie, but I read a lot of comics when I was growing up as a kid, and he was one of my favorite comic book characters. I owned so many Black Panther comics when I was growing up.
And I think the whole thing with Black Panther is, like you said, the importance of just what we were talking about earlier. Can the Black community just start making films because they want to make film? And I think Black Panther is a perfect example of what happens when you just let people from that background to just run with it. They have so much to say, and it doesn't have to be. And I mean, obviously, there's social commentary on Black Panther. There's also this sense of like, this is a great example that I can think of. So I know that this was met with a lot of like mixed reactions, but the Ring of Power show.
Yeah.
The Ring of Power show introduced a Latin elf. So basically, it was this elf that was portrayed by a Puerto Rican man. and people were all up in arms about that. Whatever, I don't care about that stuff. I remember watching it, and me as a Latin man, as a Hispanic man, seeing someone in a franchise I love that looks like me was so heartwarming and so fulfilling. So now that I think of movies like Black Panther, I'm like, there's so many boys and girls out there that are going to watch these films as they grow up, and they're like, oh, there is a superhero that looks like me.
Yes, and that it's such an important thing, and like that's why like this whole culture of conservatives who are very into like, why do we need a black superhero, or why do we need a like the new Little Mermaid? Why does Ariel have to be black and all this? It's like because there are so many kids who have never seen that in their life. They've never gone and watched a movie that is that big on that type of a scale. That's like, wow, here is somebody who looks like me. And there is nothing more important than being recognized and shown that you as a person matter and that your life is important. Like if we whitewash everything, the world becomes very boring.
Because ultimately, those kids are going to grow up to be the future filmmakers.
They are 100%, and they're going to be the ones who want to make movies after they see people that look like them in film. And I honestly, like, I'm a huge advocate for diversity in filmmaking, and I hope to see more things like that. And that's why, like, despite Marvel movies have become to a point where I am so bored because they just feel so churned out on an assembly line. I have such a hard time really getting invested in them anymore. But like looking at it through just the lens of like how many kids are going to be excited to see that is worth it existing completely.
And that is something that I just want to like pinpoint to real quick. It's like, not you don't have to connect with every movie, but there is an audience for every movie. And maybe these movies like Black Panther, they're made for the kids that are going to grow up to make a difference in this world that is in desperate need of more diversity and the voices leading this country.
I think you worded that completely perfectly, Ray, and I am so glad that you brought that up because I think that it is important to bring light and shed light onto that. And it really has made huge waves in the world, and I know the second movie seems to be getting equally as great of reception, and I know Angela Bassett was nominated for an Academy Award for her performance in that movie.
And honestly, like you read stories about like Malcolm X and all of these great figures, the Reverend Martin Luther King, and you hear their stories and you hear about what made them passionate about speaking out. Who's to say that the next leaders aren't going to, credit King T'Challa for inspiring them to stand up for their race? So we don't know the impact that these movies are going to have on people, and that is why it's important that all these voices are seen and heard.
I completely agree with you. I think that's worded perfectly. And like I said, I would add more context to it if I have seen the film, but I still have not seen that movie.
Well, I think besides seeing the film, I think I wanted to make more of a point on just because it's a Marvel movie doesn't mean it can't impact someone for the better.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. So are you ready for my next movie?
Let's do it.
So my next movie I actually wanted to bring up because we're talking about a lot of American films and we're talking about a lot of African American filmmakers, but I wanted to shed light on a film that I feel like no one talks about and that is actually directed by an African woman, and her name is Wanuri Kahayu. I probably pronounced that wrong, and I'm so sorry. I need to be better about these pronunciations. But she made a film that I actually watched on the Criterion channel called Rafiki. And essentially what the film is about is it's about these two young women in Africa, in a part of Africa that if you're gay, you can be arrested and killed. And it is a love story between these two women who live in a conservative society that are surrounded by conservative family members that have to kind of break the odds of everything around them to have a life and to have the life that they want. And I think, when we talk about Black filmmakers, we always think about the African American experience, but there are Black people that live in so many different parts of the world. And especially thinking about Africa as a whole, where Africa has so many different parts to it. There's parts that are so culturally advanced and that have more modern viewpoints on the world. But there are backwards places that still are very conservative minded, that look at women as lesser than and gay people as lesser than. And to see a film like this, that it's very bright and neon, there's a lot of really beautiful colors to it, and it depicts the love between these two people in such an incredible way, while also being devastating, knowing that like the chances of their relationship actually working if they live in this place, it's probably not going to happen, because they're risking their lives. And those types of films are difficult to watch, but they're also really important so that people can have an eye and know what other people in this world deal with. And I hope more people will watch this movie, because it is such an important film and it is so beautiful, and it moves me every time I see it. And I love it a lot. And it was on the Criterion channel. And I've really hoped for a long time that Criterion would pick it up and put it in the collection, because it's just amazing.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of this one until just now that you mentioned it. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna have to check this one out for sure.
it's actually one that Jess recommended to me. She actually found it when she was scrolling through the Criterion channel, and she said, "You have to watch this movie." And I sat down and it destroyed me. And I was like, I have to mention this, because these are the types of movies that we want to highlight. And most of my films are that I'm talking about are from African American directors, and so I thought it'd be cool to bring up an African director.
Well, a movie that I wanted to highlight, and this is just like I don't know much about this director. I just know the film that he made, and it was a great film. It actually landed Daniel Kaluuya's first Oscar, and that was Judas and the Black Messiah.
Which I have still not seen, but I have heard is incredible.
It's funny because Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield, who you know him from being like the goofy guy on Atlanta. It's so impressive what Daniel Kaluuya was able to do, being able to just being this charismatic leader for the Black Panther Party. And it was really interesting because I feel like for a long time Hollywood has, and I say Hollywood because that's the experience that I've had, is presenting the Black Panthers as these like really radicalized, this radical group that's doing violent things. And then when you see what Fred Hampton did with the Black Panther Party and all of the things that they were doing to actually help their community, to educate kids in the community, and all the things that they were doing, it's really, really impressive, because I had no clue that they were doing so much work to help the community. I always knew that, there's obviously the Hollywood stylized version of the Black Panthers, and I knew that couldn't be the case, that there had to be more than meets the eye. And there really is. And I absolutely loved Judas and the Black Messiah, and I just think it's definitely worth your time for sure if you want to be more educated on Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party.
Well, I am 100% going to watch that movie. It's been on my list for a while, and it's funny that you brought this up, Ray, because I think this is a perfect segue for me. If I was making a list of my top 10 actors right now, Lakeith Stanfield is in my top 10 actors.
And he was nominated for an Oscar for this.
And he is incredible. And there are actually 2 movies on my list, actually 3, because we already talked about Get Out. We talked about Jordan Peele, but there are 2 movies on my list that feature Mr. Lakeith Stanfield. And the first one I want to bring up is one of my favorite movies of the past 10 years. I love this movie a lot. I think everyone should see it at least once, and that is the Boots Riley directed film Sorry to Bother You.
I was going to bring that movie too, so I'm glad you brought it.
I love Sorry to Bother You. And when you talk about films that kind of stray away from the normal elements of filmmaking, the one word I would use to describe this movie is bonkers.
Yep. In fact, I remember when I saw this film in theaters, and I remember thinking to myself, I was so excited that there was this poignant comedy out there. They got so experimental.
Yes. And in every way.
And I love it. It's so experimental. It's so weird. And for the better too. I love how weird it gets. how even ridiculous it gets. But when you really think about the level of just craziness happening in this film, it's really trying to say something.
It is. It's trying to say a lot, and it nails it too. And I do want to mention, I talked about Lakeith Stanfield, but Tessa Thompson is also incredible in this movie. And also shout out our boy Stephen Yeun.
Yeah, I love Stephen Yeun.
I love Stephen Yeun. He's amazing. But this movie is perfectly casted, and I also think for this being Boots Riley's directorial debut, like what an incredible directorial debut.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. It was really interesting because like I said, I watched this movie and I thought to myself, like, this is his first movie.
Yeah,
There's no
it
way.
was unbelievable.
Well, and then the other thing is, the music is done by the Coop. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Yeah, that's Boots Riley's band.
And that's so Boots Riley also essentially scored his own movie.
Exactly. And I think back all the time to how funny it is that Lakeith Stanfield's character's name is Cash. It's such an anti-establishment movie in the best way possible. And it's funny, the whole concept of the white voice that's introduced.
Oh my! I love how Patton Oswalt just ran with it.
He does such a great job in it. And the third act of this movie goes in a direction that I truly don't know if anyone would be ready for it. Because when it happened,
the second he hears the screams in the bathroom.
Oh God. Yeah, I wish I could say that I was ready for it, but I was not ready for the end of this movie whatsoever. But yeah, I wanted to bring up Sorry to Bother You because I love Lakeith Stanfield so much. And I have one more Lakeith Stanfield mention I want to make if you're okay with it, Ray.
You can never have enough Lakeith.
And so the other Lakeith Stanfield movie I want to mention, he's not in it for very long, but he is in the film. He's a part of the movie. And this is a film that, with Ray and I being so ingrained in music culture, that I had to bring up, and that is the movie Dope.
Dope. I don't know if I've seen that one.
So Dope is, I guarantee you've seen this movie, Ray. It's about this young kid who lives in LA, and he's struggling to take his SATs and stuff. And he and his friends, one of them is played by Tony Revolori from Grand Budapest Hotel, get involved in this scheme to make money so that they can go to college. And they're in a punk band together.
Why haven't I seen this? I pulled it up. I pulled it up and no, I haven't seen it.
It is incredible. I watched this on Netflix for the first time several years ago, and I was completely blown away by the movie. It is hilarious. It is subversive. It really takes a lot of risks to where it gets they essentially sell drugs using Bitcoin transactions, and they get so good at it that like it's always teetering the line of, are they going to succeed? But it's one of those movies that they're doing it for a good reason, because they live in a shitty community, they're trying to make what's best for their lives, and they're all really intelligent. But the subversive element is that they're in this, they make punk music together, which I thought it was really cool. And the score is really amazing, and I cannot recommend this movie enough. It's wonderful. I actually own the Blu-ray copy of it as well, and I've seen it a few times. But Lakeith is in it for a little bit of time. Zoe Kravitz is in the movie. Like, there's a lot of people that show up in it that you'll recognize. But it's phenomenal. I cannot recommend it enough. And I needed to mention my boy Lakeith twice, and obviously shout out Atlanta, one of the best TV shows ever made. But yeah, I'm a huge Lakeith Stanfield fan, and anytime he shows up in anything, I am a happy camper. So yeah, add Dope to your watch soon list, because I feel like it'd be one of your new favorites.
I'm trying to see where if do you know if it's still on Netflix?
The Dope, I'm pretty sure it still is on Netflix. I think it's a Netflix original.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. I just found it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, I'll have to check it out. One that I wanted to bring up real quick. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this one because we literally did an entire episode on it, but
Last Black Man in San Francisco, baby.
Yeah, we gotta shout out Last Black Man in San Francisco.
I was hoping it's on my list, but I knew one of us was going to bring it up. I would probably put this in one of the most important films ever made. I like the more I think about it, the more I love it, and every time I revisit it, I love it more. And Ray, I have to say, next to Her, this is like the most excited I've ever been about a movie I've introduced you to, and was so glad that you loved it as much as you did.
Oh yeah, I love it so much to the point where I picked up the fancy Blu-ray and everything.
And I think it's perfect to shout out Jonathan Majors because look at that man's career. Good Lord.
Yeah.
He's
Um,
incredible in it. I actually got my vinyl copy of the score in finally.
yeah,
Uh,
I saw.
the the score is brilliant. Like we did an entire episode on Last Black Man in San Francisco. But I think Joe Talbot proved how great he is as a director. And I just want to see more from this group. I think they're absolutely amazing, and I want to see more from them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know how much more did you have to share?
So I have like three more.
Yeah, you wanna take on another one because I'm running low.
Sure. So this one is more of a quick mention, but we talk about representation in film, and we talk about kids wanting to see themselves in film. And I've rewatched this movie a few times, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. And I think it is amazing. And I just want to bring up The Princess and the Frog.
I almost brought that one up, so I'm glad I made your list.
I love Princess and the Frog, probably one of my favorite Disney movies, because the story is amazing. I really love the fairy tale element of it, but it's also grounded in a very real reality that I think a lot of people have to deal with, which is fighting every day of your life to try to fulfill your dream and going through, living through really difficult situations to try to make that a reality. And I think all the vocal performances in the film are great. I think that the music is absolutely beautiful. And this film is so embedded in New Orleans culture and life that it just feels so real while also having that kiddish charm of a Disney movie. And yeah, I don't have a lot more I want to say about it other than I love it.
One of the ones that I wanted to bring up really quickly too. We don't have to spend a lot of time, but it is a movie that I feel. I know that there is this whole controversy about the whole white savior thing.
Yeah.
Which I understand why. Trust me, I am not in any way, shape, or form diminishing that trope in film, but I do think it's worth noting, and we can just talk about these back to back. We don't have to spend too much time on it because I understand how these probably haven't aged in the best of ways, but I personally am a big fan of seeing of having those feel good movies that break barriers down.
Yeah.
So one that comes to mind immediately is Remember the Titans.
Absolutely. And it obviously it does have those tropes that you're talking about, but I still think that it is a really important film, and I think that it's still a really solid movie.
Yeah, no, I still love Remember the Titans. I feel like there is something about that film to be able to, every now and then I want to see a movie that just kind of reminds me that we can put our differences aside and really come together and for the better.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Remember the Titans is one that comes to mind. And the other one that, again, I know falls under a similar trope, but there's just some moments in that film that just makes you like, it hits me to my core is Glory.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Glory. Yes, Glory destroys me every time I see it.
Especially that scene when Denzel is getting whipped.
Oh, God. It's so rough to watch.
And I love that movie. It's one of my favorite, like, war epic movies. And I know those are like, there's definitely the trope of like white savior on it, but every now and then, like I understand that every film is going to be perfect, but I do love like the stories being told that like, hey, we can move past this, and it's going to be hard, but we can do it.
Yes, I agree. I think both of those movies have their validity despite their problems, but I think when you look at anything through a contextual lens of like when it was made and why it was made, because I know a lot of people say the same thing about The Help.
Yeah.
But I think there's a reason that those films exist and there's validity to them. But I think it is important, as to what I talked about earlier with Spike Lee, is that even when something exists, it's okay to question it. It's okay to want more out of it. We don't
Well,
have to be complacent. We can say, let's make things in the future more thoughtful of these types of things. And that's a good thing.
I'm also of the mindset, and this might, I hope this doesn't get me in trouble because I like to think that this is a very, this shouldn't be like that controversial to say, but we talked about earlier about how I had some people walk out during Black Klansman.
Yeah.
I don't think everyone is ready to have a subversive film thrown at their face right away.
No.
Um, I didn't become a vegetarian because I saw some animal cruelty video. I became a vegetarian because I saw Okja that kind of points at the mistreatment of animals. So I feel like there are certain films like Remember the Titans, like Glory. Hopefully this doesn't get me canceled, but like Green Book, I understand the problem for those films, but not everyone is ready to have the hard conversation right away. So you do need those like Trojan horse films to hopefully open people's minds a little bit. And hopefully movies like Black Panther are starting to make it a little bit easier to introduce subversive topics to some of these different people that hopefully are opening their minds a little bit to these stories.
And anything that gets people to think is better than nothing.
Yeah, and
Uh,
that's where I stand. Like I
yeah.
understand movies like Green Book raise some eyebrows, but like I was able to show that movie to like some of my conservative family members, and they were able to be like, "Oh wow, like I hadn't thought of that." I was like, "Oh
Yes.
great, now here's something that's a little bit more top tier."
Exactly. And I actually want to segue into talking about one of those top tier films and probably a movie that destroyed me more than any film I've ever watched in the theater, which is talking about another really incredible director. But I wanted to bring up 12 Years a Slave.
I actually haven't seen that one, and I hear
Oh
that
my
movie
God.
is hard.
It's probably one of the most difficult films I've ever watched because it depicts slavery in a way that is so raw and guttural and realistic. Because it's based off of a real story. So it's based off of a guy named Solomon Northup who lived in the North. He was a free man that lived in New York City, and one night he gets asked to go play violin at this like event. It's like a mixed race event that was going on. And so he goes there, and when he's there at night, he gets kidnapped and forced into slavery. And
Oh,
so you're looking at a guy who was a free man living in New York City with a wife and children who is taken away from his family and forced into slavery for 12 years. And the entire
geez.
movie is looking at what he has to go through because I mean you think like he is living as a free person, he doesn't know what that life is like, so he's being forced into it. And there are some horrifying sequences. There's one in particular where the slave owner gets mad at him, and so he puts him on a noose in the front yard to like not hang him completely to his death, but to hang him as a punishment to where he can stand on his tiptoes. And
Oh,
it's a long take sequence where the camera does not cut away from him hanging from that tree for like
oh.
8 minutes. And I swear to God, it was the most heartbreaking and horrible scene I've ever watched in a movie. And that is all due to the performances in the film. And once again, incredible actor, gonna butcher his name, but Chiwetel Ejiofor, who is just an absolutely amazing actor in everything that he's in. Even in the Doctor Strange movies, he's great. But he is amazing in it. Michael Fassbender plays a horrible human being in the movie. And, Steve McQueen, he's made some really great movies. I mean, between Shame and Widows and Hunger, but 12 Years a Slave is a movie that moved me a lot, and it's beautiful and people need to see it. It hits some very hard truths about that time period, and yeah, I would recommend you check it out, Ray. It's a really incredibly well made movie.
Huh. Yeah, I'll have to do that because that sounds incredible. So I have one last one that I wanted to bring up,
Absolutely.
and I'm gonna cheat a little bit because this is actually a TV show.
Oh, hit me with it.
I've talked about it in the past, but and I'm mad that this didn't get renewed for another season. But Lovecraft Country.
Oh, bring up our boy Jonathan Majors again.
Yeah, I do love Mr. Majors. A Lovecraft Country it's an amazing. It's just 10 episodes, but so notoriously H.P. Lovecraft was known for um, some really great writings, but him as a person, not the best person. Very, very outspoken against, not against, but for racism, I guess I should say, against black people. Like he was definitely had some very controversial, racist, awful opinions about, about race class. He notoriously said some really horrible things. So what they did with Lovecraft Country, and it's actually a book that I like to read. I haven't read the book, but what they did with the show is that what happens in the book and in the show is that they took the writings of Lovecraft and they used Lovecraftian topics to kind of tell this story about living in Jim Crow South in the United States. So it becomes a point where you're not really sure what's worse, whether it is the humans or the monsters, because you have these characters traversing through like Jim Crow South while being targeted by obviously um, white people that are trying to harm them, but also you have this whole like backstory of these Lovecraft style monsters that are lurking about as well. So it's like this double threat, and which one is like the worst threat type of scenario.
That sounds really great.
And yeah, you get all these like really awful looks at what happened being a minority during the Jim Crow era. They even tackle on some topics of being a gay man also in the Jim Crow era, and how that even affects them from within the community. So there's a lot of topics being covered here about that struggle, and I wish HBO Max would have renewed it for another season. But season one and the only season of Lovecraft Country, it's phenomenal, and I highly recommend it.
I need to check this show out. I've been holding off on it for way too long. Well, I have one more thing I want to mention before we're done, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite directors has only done a couple of films, but I love him a lot. And this man was actually born in London, and his father is Nigerian and his mother is Norwegian. But are you familiar with the filmmaker Richard Ayoade?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, so he was in a TV show that a lot of people really loved called The IT Crowd. But I know Richard Ayoade from one of my favorite films of all time, and that is the movie Submarine, which what is really interesting about this and why I wanted to bring this up is obviously Richard is a black man who mixed race. Obviously, his mom is from Norway and his dad is from Nigeria. But what I think is interesting is this is a movie that has a predominantly white cast, and it's a very Wes Anderson-esque comedy. Very subversive, very hilarious. It's one of my favorite films of all time. But I think it is important to see and mention Richard because I want to talk about the versatility in filmmakers who are able to, cast people from different backgrounds in their movies to kind of get what they want out of their material. And I think that it's cool that he, made this movie that has a predominantly white cast, but is able to make a really funny, subversive, great comedy. And that, he kind of works with who he wants and does what he wants. And there's all different people in the black community that are making different types of films and different types of stories with different cast members. And I just wanted to shed some light on it because I know a lot of these movies we talk about have some really heavy subject matter. And this is one that is just a really fun comedy that has some dramatic moments. But it's one of my favorite films of all time. And I just wanted to mention it before the episode was over.
It's interesting. I actually have seen this cover and everything, and I thought it was like some I don't know. I thought it was like a Beatles like making a because the character almost looks like a young
Beetle, yeah.
Beetle, and then like Submarine, like I thought Yellow Submarine, especially because S Sub is in yellow, so I'm like, oh, this must be like a Beatles documentary or something. I pulled it up and immediately I'm like, oh yeah, I have totally seen this poster before.
Yes, absolutely. But I absolutely love it. It's such a great movie. And Ray, I just want to say thank you. I thought that was a really awesome episode. I'm really glad that we were able to, talk about some of our favorite black filmmakers. And I'm looking forward to be able to do more episodes like this because we have a platform and I want to use our platform to talk about things that we think are important. And I very much think that representation is important.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm really excited that we were able to do this episode and to add a bunch of films to my list that had never even heard of, which is the beauty about this podcast, being able to talk about those things. And for our listeners out there, like, seek these films out if you haven't seen them, please, especially if you are identified with this culture. Reach out to us, talk to us. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear the things that have impacted you, because we want to understand more. We film is obviously something that we love watching for entertainment value, but also it is, like, I would argue that sometimes more important than the things that we learned in school.
Absolutely. I completely agree with what you said. And I'm so glad that we were able to have this discussion. But now that we have finished the episode, Ray, I think we talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the episode, but I think, it was fun talking to John. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Oh, yeah, it was great.
So we decided that for you guys out there as the audience, we'd like you guys to be able to hear us talk to someone else already. So somehow we have managed to get on the show the Addams Family filmmakers, who made most recently their film Hellbender that came out in 2021. And so we will be having the filmmakers Toby Poser and John Adams on the podcast to discuss their work and have a very similar conversation that we had to John. And I am very excited about this episode, Ray. I'm really excited that we've been able to get two interviews so close together.
Oh, yeah, I'm so excited. And please, if you're able, go seek out Hellbender. We're going to be heavily focusing on Hellbender, so please go seek it out so you can be in the conversation with us.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that this is our second interview with filmmakers, and we've got plenty more things to come in the future for you all. And I hope that you enjoyed our interview with John. And I know we plug everything already, but go back and listen to that episode. It was a really big one for Ray and I. We really had a wonderful time with it. And watch the video version, because it was really fun to watch us do the video version.
Yeah, it was. There were moments where I'm like, what do I do? I'm just kind of staring blankly at the screen.
But it was an amazing experience, and we're going to have the same experience with the Addams Family, so look forward to that in the next episode. You can follow us over at the Film Monsters podcast for all the updates on that and when the episodes are going to be released. And as always, you can follow me at My Exit Unfair and Ray at Analog C for us posting music related content and all of that other good stuff. And Ray, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up, or are you ready to sign this bad boy off?
I think we're good to sign out.
We're going to sign off now, and we will see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.